a transfer of $22 million was mistakenly deposited into my bank account. I contacted the bank to return the funds, but when I gave my name, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then they said, "Ma'am, this is not a mistake." When I asked what they meant, I was met with the same unsettling quiet. Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again. I'm happy you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel, like this video, and let me know in the comments which city you're listening from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Maddox, and for most of my adult life, I believed that if you worked hard, told the truth, and kept your head down, the world would treat you fairly in return. I had no reason to believe otherwise. I was 43 years old, working as a mid-level compliance officer at a regional insurance company in Charlotte, North Carolina. I owned a modest 3-bedroom house on Pembroke Lane, drove a 7-year-old Honda Accord, and paid my mortgage on time every month without fail. I had a savings account, a 401k I rarely thought about, and a checking account that almost never held more than $4,000. I wasn't rich. I wasn't struggling. I was exactly the kind of person the financial system ignores. Ordinary, reliable, invisible. My personal life was quieter than I like to admit. I had been divorced for 6 years from Derek Maddox, a commercial real estate developer who, during the last years of our marriage, had been secretly building an entire second life I knew nothing about. After the divorce, I kept the house, the debt, and a deep exhaustion toward other people's motives. I had 2 close friends, Nina Carver, a high school English teacher who called every Sunday, and Paul Weston, a former colleague who had moved to Atlanta but texted me more than anyone else. I had a cat named Booth. I went to farmers markets on Saturdays. I was fine. The first unusual thing happened on a Tuesday in October. I logged into my Piedmont First National Bank account, just as I did every few days, to confirm my automatic payments had cleared. It was a habit I developed after my divorce, when Derek had drained our joint account twice without warning. I opened the app, checked my balance, and froze. The number on the screen was $22,418,000. I actually laughed, thinking the app had glitched. I closed it and reopened it, but the amount was still there. I checked the transaction history. A wire transfer had arrived the night before at 11:47 p.m., labeled only as internal wire transfer, with no sender name, reference, or explanation. I sat at my kitchen table staring at my phone, my coffee going cold. The amount felt unreal, like a typo or someone else's disaster mistakenly delivered to me. I knew with certainty from my experience in compliance that this money was not mine. Somewhere someone was missing $22 million, and they would want it back. I called the bank at 8:02 a.m. I went through the automated system, waited several minutes, and was connected to a representative named Marcus. I explained the situation and gave him the amount. There was a pause, longer than normal, heavy, and unusual. Then Marcus said quietly, "Ma'am, that transfer is not an error." Something cold ran through me. He then told me he would transfer me to the private banking department and that someone would contact me later that day. Before I could ask further questions, the call was transferred. I sat in silence, listening to hold music, trying to understand why a bank employee had reacted so strangely at my name. I called the private banking line. No one answered. I left a detailed voicemail and then went to work. But I couldn't focus. My thoughts kept returning to the number, $22,418,000. With my background in compliance, I knew large, unexplained transfers trigger fraud investigations, regulatory reporting, and suspicion under financial law. A transfer like this would not remain unnoticed. What disturbed me most, however, was Marcus's reaction to my name. By evening, I began considering every possible explanation. A banking error, a system test, a clerical mistake. But another possibility kept returning. What if the money wasn't sent to the wrong person at all? What if it was intentionally sent to me? In my experience, people are sometimes used as pass-through accounts in financial schemes, selected because they appear ordinary and unlikely to draw attention. And when things go wrong, they're the ones left exposed. If that were the case, then someone already knew my name, my account, and my banking details. I created a plan. I would document everything, notify the bank formally, contact the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and consult a lawyer immediately. I would not touch the money. The next morning, I met Diane Reyes, a financial crimes attorney in Charlotte. After I explained everything, she immediately noted the same concern, the bank's reaction to my name. She believed my account may have been flagged internally, suggesting someone with access had prior knowledge of this transfer. The situation, she said, was not a simple banking mistake. Diane began legal action, filing complaints, and sending formal requests for disclosure of the transaction's origin. That afternoon, a senior vice president from the bank called me, offering a discussion about the situation, without ever calling it an error. Diane told me not to respond directly. That night, I investigated my ex-husband, Derek Maddox. His company had previously been linked to a federal inquiry involving suspicious financial transactions. Although no charges were filed, records showed connections to a private equity firm, Hion Meridian LLC, which had ties to his sister, Sandra Maddox. The pattern suggested this was not random at all. Somehow, I'd been pulled into something connected to my past. Days later, Diane escalated the case to federal authorities. She instructed me to continue my normal routine and not draw attention. Then, 4 days later, I received a call. A woman introduced herself, Sandra Maddox. She claimed there had been a misunderstanding regarding the transfer and suggested we resolve it quietly. I told her that any communication must go through my attorney, Diane Reyes. I'll have her contact details sent to whatever number you prefer. There was a brief pause. Claire, lawyers complicate things. This doesn't need to be complicated. Sandra, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I filed a report with FinCEN 4 days ago. Whatever this was meant to be, it's no longer quiet. Please contact Diane Reyes. I ended the call. My hands were slightly trembling as I put my phone back into my bag. I stayed in the parking garage for 3 minutes, just breathing. Then I called Diane and repeated the entire conversation word for word from memory. By then, I had started keeping a voice memo recording running whenever I was in my car, something Diane had advised me to do. Derek called 2 days later. I recognized his number immediately. I had deleted it years ago, yet I still remembered it, the way you remember an old scar. I didn't answer. He called twice more within the hour. The second time, he left a voicemail. His tone was different from Sandra's. Where she was smooth and controlled, Derek sounded pressured, like a man used to people giving in, now unsettled that I wasn't. He said the money was in the wrong place. Those were his words, careful in a way that made them sound even more incriminating. He warned that things could become very serious for me if federal investigators misunderstood the situation. He insisted he was trying to help me. Then he said he would be in Charlotte on Friday and that we should meet. Diane submitted the voicemail to the U.S. Attorney's Office as evidence within an hour of me forwarding it. On Friday, Derek did come to Charlotte. He came to my house. At 6:45 in the evening, he rang the doorbell. I watched him through the front window but did not open the door. He looked older than I remembered, his expression carrying the tired certainty of someone who never fully believed other people meant what they said. He stood there for 4 minutes, rang again, then left. At Diane's advice, I had installed a Ring camera 2 days earlier. I had footage of everything. The following Monday, Diane informed me that Piedmont First National had been formally subpoenaed for all records linked to my account. A second subpoena had also been issued to Hion Meridian LLC's banking institution in Delaware. The process was moving forward. Once it started, it couldn't be easily stopped. I had set it in motion. After that, I took 4 days of distance. Not rest, just space. I still went to work, still functioned, but I stepped back from the constant legal digging in the evenings. I went to the farmer's market on Saturday. I had dinner with Nina on Sunday and didn't discuss any of it. I even laughed at her story about a student submitting an essay written entirely in song lyrics. Booth slept on my lap. I sat on the back porch and watched the November light fade over the fence, letting myself briefly feel like someone whose life might still turn out fine. The offer came through Diane's office. It arrived as a formal letter from an Atlanta law firm called Whitmore and Galt LLP, which Diane immediately recognized as a firm that handled sensitive financial negotiations. The letter proposed a resolution. If I agreed to withdraw all reports, complaints, and federal referrals related to the October transfer, I would receive $2.5 million. The original $22,418,000 would be recalled, and all parties would sign a mutual non-disclosure agreement. The word resolution appeared 7 times. I read it at Diane's conference table on a Wednesday morning. My reaction wasn't temptation, it was recognition. I had seen this kind of offer before in other cases, the moment when pressure turned into money. "They're trying to buy your silence," I said. "They're trying to test whether you can be bought," Diane replied. "If you accept, it becomes evidence of obstruction. They know that." We both understood what the letter really was, not an offer, but a test. I placed it face down. "Send it to the U.S. Attorney's Office," I said. Diane had already prepared the cover letter. After that, things went quiet. Sandra stopped calling. Derek didn't reach out. No further letters arrived. The silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt like repositioning. They were watching, waiting to see if I would slip. I didn't. But I also knew I wasn't unshakable. That was when I called Paul Weston. Paul had worked with me for 4 years before moving to a risk management consultancy in Atlanta. He was methodical, calm, and had a rare ability to listen without rushing to fix things. I called him from my porch one Thursday night and told him everything, completely, not the simplified version I had given others. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he asked, "Are you keeping physical copies of everything?" That was very Paul, practical, grounded. "Yes," I said. "Diane has the originals. I have duplicates in a separate safety deposit box." "Good." Another pause. "You're going to win this, you know." I didn't believe that yet. "I don't know that," I said. "I do," he replied. "They built this assuming you'd either comply or disappear. They were wrong." Nina came over the next day with food and wine. No questions asked. We sat at my kitchen table until midnight. We didn't solve anything. But when she left, I felt less alone in it. That mattered more than I expected. Derek called again Monday from a different number. I answered without knowing it was him. "I just want to talk," he said. I had already started recording. "Then talk," I replied. 2 days later, he came with Sandra. We met at Diane's office in a formal recorded session with a paralegal present. Everything was documented. They presented themselves carefully, reasonable, composed, trying to appear cooperative. Derek spoke first. He said he was sorry things had escalated. He said this should have been handled privately, as family. The word was intentional, aimed at old history. He said he wanted the process to stop. The subpoenas, the federal attention, all of it, before things went further. Sandra followed. She was sharper, more controlled. She suggested she understood my position and even respected my caution. Then she shifted tone, almost personal, almost sympathetic. She suggested she knew what it meant to be underestimated. She implied we were similar. It was a deliberate strategy, not force, but alignment. A mirror held up to make me doubt where I stood. Then she mentioned my finances, my mortgage, my salary, my limitations, and said she hoped I understood what $22 million could mean for someone like me. Not an offer, a reminder of scale. "I understand exactly what you're doing," I said. Neither of them responded. "You want me to feel small, outmatched, Like the rational choice is to walk away and take the money instead of the fight. I looked at them both. This only works if I can be controlled. You've misunderstood me for years. Derek's expression changed. The performance dropped. You're not as protected as you think, he said. Diane's paralegal stood. This meeting is over. They left. In the hallway afterward, I felt my pulse still elevated. Derek's words lingered. You're not as protected as you think you are. But something in me had already settled. Fear was there, but it no longer pointed toward retreat. It pointed forward. The federal interview was scheduled for January at the FBI Financial Crimes Unit in Charlotte. Derek and Sandra were both subpoenaed to appear. This time, there was no voluntary participation, no negotiation, just process. Diane had prepared me for weeks, not emotionally, structurally. Stay factual, she said. Sequence matters. Evidence leads. You don't interpret, you document. I arrived with a complete timeline. Emails, subpoenas, recordings, letters, filings, everything arranged chronologically. Each item was a point in time I had lived through. Nothing was abstract anymore. It was all real, organized, and undeniable. The interview lasted 40 minutes. Afterward, I waited in the corridor with Diane, drinking bad coffee from a vending machine. The hallway was plain, fluorescent, and forgettable, and I realized something simple. The most important moments in a life don't look important while they're happening. Nothing about that hallway announced itself. Nothing suggested that behind an ordinary door, the events of the past 3 months were approaching their conclusion. But I later learned, during a brief debrief with Special Agent Simmons, held with Diane and me before we left, what had actually happened. The Delaware banking records confirmed that $22,418,000 had been transferred from a High on Meridian account to Piedmont First National on the evening of October 14th. According to Hyan's internal communications, obtained through subpoenaed emails, the intended recipient was not Claire Maddox, but a numbered LLC created by Derek Maddox 3 months earlier and never funded. That LLC's routing number at Piedmont First National differed from my account number by a single digit. Just 1 digit. The funds ended up in my account because of a clerical mistake. A real one, but not one that cleared anyone of responsibility. Because the internal emails also revealed something far more serious. Sandra Maddox had discovered the error within hours. Instead of correcting it, contacting the bank, or initiating a reversal, she chose to wait. She decided to observe what would happen, to potentially use my identity, my account, and my compliance background as a protective layer. If investigators became involved, there would already be a legitimate person attached to a legitimate account, a ready-made buffer. When Sandra and Derek were questioned in the interview room, their stories immediately conflicted. Derek claimed Sandra made the decision alone. Sandra insisted the LLC had been Derek's idea, and that the error originated with his firm. Each blamed the other with the practiced precision of 2 people who had once coordinated their story and then abandoned it under pressure. Special Agent Simmons recorded the contradictions and separated them for individual questioning. When each was asked when they first learned of the misdirected transfer, their timelines differed by 4 days. One of them was clearly lying about the sequence, possibly both. 3 follow-up questions were asked. Their answers failed to align in any instance. When Diane and I left the federal building at 12:17 p.m., I held my folder under my arm and experienced something unfamiliar since October, a clear, steady sense of having told the truth and seen it confirmed. The federal process continued in its own way, not fast, but irreversible. By late March, 4 months after the interview and 6 months after the deposit, indictments were issued. Derek Maddox was charged with wire fraud, conspiracy to commit money laundering, and obstruction of justice related to his threatening voicemail. Sandra Maddox faced 4 charges: wire fraud, money laundering conspiracy, obstruction, and filing false corporate registration documents in Delaware connected to High on Meridian LLC. Richard Hale, a senior vice president at Piedmont First National, was also indicted. He had been responsible for instructing bank staff to route any inquiries about my account directly to him. He had known about the error within hours and failed to report it, largely due to Sandra's long-standing private banking relationship with the institution. Later, Simmons told Diane that this relationship had been treated internally as too sensitive to disrupt. A federal examination of Piedmont First National followed. The bank entered a consent order within 40 days, agreeing to strengthen wire transfer oversight and monitoring systems, accept federal supervision for 18 months, and pay a $4.3 million penalty. They also issued me a formal apology letter signed by the CEO acknowledging the mishandling of my inquiry. Diane framed it and placed it in her office, calling it a reminder of what happens when institutions underestimate persistence. The $22,418,000 was eventually reversed by court order on November 19th. 5 weeks after it arrived, my account returned to $3,847, minus a small amount spent on certified mail and administrative costs. Diane's legal fees were substantial, and I paid them without regret. She had earned far more than she charged. When I issued the final payment, she handed me a copy of the indictment with a note that simply read, "You did this." I still keep it with the rest of the case documents. On the day the indictments were announced, I sat at my kitchen table with Booth on my lap and read the Department of Justice statement on my phone. It was brief. It named Derek, Sandra, and Richard Hale. It described the scheme as a misdirected wire used to create a financial buffer in a laundering operation. The so-called unwitting account holder was not named. It only referred to me as a Charlotte resident who received the funds and promptly reported them to authorities. I read that phrase twice. Promptly reported them to authorities. That was all it said about me. That was the entire public version of my role. And strangely, that was true. I hadn't spent the money. I hadn't hidden it. I hadn't accepted any offer. I hadn't tried to control the situation. I had simply told the truth from the beginning and continued telling it through every stage of pressure, silence, and manipulation. Each time, the truth had held. And eventually, that was enough. Not brilliance, not strategy, just consistency. Paul called that evening. "I told you," he said. "How do you feel?" he asked. I thought about it. "Like myself," I said. "Exactly myself." Nina came over the next weekend with champagne and food. We cooked together and ate by the window while winter lights stretched across the table. Booth sat between us, pretending not to care. That was when I understood something important. This is what you protect when you protect yourself. Not money, not outcomes. A life that still feels like yours. Derek's trial was set for September. Sandra's motions to separate their cases were denied. Richard Hale accepted a plea deal in exchange for testimony. By May, the system had fully turned. Derek was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. His company collapsed under investigations, lawsuits, and investor withdrawals, eventually dissolving entirely. Sandra was convicted on 3 charges and sentenced to 5 years. The judge noted that her decision to leave the funds in my account, rather than correct the error, showed a deliberate willingness to expose an innocent person to legal risk for convenience. I did not attend her sentencing. Diane sent me the transcript. Richard Hale received 18 months and was permanently banned from the banking industry. His testimony, supported by preserved text messages, became the backbone of the prosecution's case. Piedmont First National lost several senior executives within 6 months. Its stock dropped sharply after the regulatory action, but later stabilized. I closed my account there and moved to a credit union. My life changed in both subtle and significant ways. Diane introduced me to attorneys building a compliance consulting practice, and I eventually joined them. I left my insurance job, trained my replacement, and started a new role as a compliance consultant specializing in anti-money laundering systems. It used everything I knew, and more. I kept my house. I finally replaced the roof I had delayed for years. I painted the porch a deep, muted green I had once seen in a magazine and never forgotten. It felt right, in a way I couldn't explain. Paul visited in the fall. We walked through the park, talked about work, and drank whiskey on my porch while Booth patrolled the yard like he owned it. "Do you think about it much?" he asked. "Less than I expected," I said. And it was true. Over time, the experience stopped feeling like a wound and became something processed, still present but no longer sharp. It changed me toward clarity rather than damage. I understood what I could endure and what I could stand for. Nina finished the novel she had been writing for years. It was genuinely good. I told her so. The farmer's market started carrying a goat cheese I became oddly loyal to. I went every Saturday. I drove my old Honda. I lived a life that fit me again. I learned 3 things that year. First, ordinary people are chosen because they seem unlikely to resist. Second, in systems designed to confuse you, documentation and the right ally are everything. Third, silence, money, and "you're too small to win" are not truths. They are tactics.